Every year people ask me about what is coming up in the next year. They're always asking for predictions. And previously, I used to do these every year. I used to do, what was going to happen in the fire monkey year, what was going to happen in the earth dog year, or whatever. And I would essentially use Chinese classical wisdom, particularly around things like the stems and branches and so on, to look at predictions for what were going to happen in the coming year. So right now in February, essentially we're going to enter into the year of the water tiger, which has a movement away from the metal ox. Actually, on a really simplistic level, shows a movement away from a year where people are attempting to cling unsuccessfully, ultimately to some kind of normality, into a period where actually there's a letting go of that kind of normality towards an acceptance of a somewhat turbulent change. But I think that's all well and good, and I think Chinese horoscopes are fine, but they're not really the defining energy or the defining influence of this period of time as far as I'm concerned. I think that the Chinese understanding of the horoscopes is great, but I think they're in the background really. They're not that important compared to one of the greater shifts that is happening on a wider cosmological level. And that's really what interests me right now. That interests me a lot more than Chinese horoscopes, which is why I haven't really done them. Partially I haven't done them also because it hasn't been amazingly good news and I don't want to be the bearer of bad news, but also because I don't think they're that important right now. I think that, or I know that right now we are going through a major shift with regards to the spiritual and the material aspects of human life and existence. We are in a change time. And to me, that overrides the Chinese horoscope. So essentially, for the last year, this year, and probably next year, the year after, I'm more likely to talk about this because this is what interests me, because this is really the integral quality that's overriding everything. Probably when this shift is done, which will be another couple of years, then I'm more likely to returning to the horoscopes, the Chinese horoscopes each year, because essentially life does something like this. And right now we're in this turbulent period, and then we're back to here. And during this phase, I'll be more interested in what's going on according to Chinese thought. But last year I talked to you about the Great Conjunction, essentially a transition that we were moving through. I think it was last Christmas. I recorded it in Bali just after I got there last Christmas, and you can find that, you can look it up. But essentially, I'll summarize it a little bit here, but we have now been in this phase for 1 year, and we have another couple of years of this phase as well. So we're a third of the way into, roughly, give or take, you know what I mean? It's not so exact. But we're about a third of the way into a big transition period that the entire planet is experiencing. And I think it's fair to say that the qualities we discussed last year and the qualities that really epitomize this transition phase are certainly being seen year into this phase. I think that's very safe to see. And they're going to continue for another couple of years as well. And that has positives and negatives. Definitely, and we need to understand them. Now, I am seeing people fall into the negative aspects of this transition period, definitely, but I'm also seeing some people that are managing to derive some benefit from it. So what I'm going to do is I'll talk a little bit more about this transition that we're experiencing so people can understand it a little bit more. And hopefully this will help to guide them into maybe either carrying on with the course they're following, maybe correcting it slightly, because of course it's like anything. If the change that is taking place is a path, some people are walking down that path, some people are just off of the path and just need to deviate onto it a little bit, and then they'll find life will unfold for them, and other people have wandered off into the thickets and are currently scratches all over their face because they're scrambling through the undergrowth, getting lost in the dark. And I think for some, that's probably how they feel over the last year. And as much as anything, if they actually understood a little bit about how to harmonize with some of the transitions that are taking place, they might find this journey a little bit less traumatic, a little bit less arduous. So let's see if we can explore this a little bit. First of all, I want to say, though, that, of course, these are my understandings and my experiences, and well, partially it is this, but also on top of that, It's also the experience that's come from actually having a very, increasingly as years go on, more of a direct contact with this kind of fluctuating influence that is upon us. So it is also from experience rather than just opinion, I should say. I should be careful of those two words, really. And this is after, my entire life of being involved in this tradition. It's not some innate sensitivity that I think I was born with, or any kind of entitled feel that I should have a right to understand these things. It is actually from training. The more I train, the deeper I go, the further and further I get sucked into, really, because that's what it feels like. It feels like being drawn into direct experience of some of these influences. And of course, I'm guided by very skilled, evolved, don't know what the word you want to use, teachers that help me to understand these further, to help me interpret what I'm feeling, what I'm experiencing. So, it is based on something, and it's based on a kind of knowledge. It's just not looking at charts or something like this. But at the same time, please don't take it as gospel. I know some of you wouldn't. I mean, really what happens, you hear something, you get three types of reaction, don't you? You get people that just accept it as gospel. Oh, that's what Damo said, and that must be true. Then you get the people that rebel, that's what Damo said, and something in me just instantly has to make me disagree, whatever. There's that. And then there's the third type where people actually kind of consider and look at it and maybe sit with it some time and see what you think of it. And I think the third way is the most healthy. I think blind following is never good. Blind rebellion is just childish. And then I think the third way, to actually sit down and consider it and think about it and give it some thought, and maybe see if you've seen this in action over the previous year, and see whether you can see how this might influence the coming year. And you might agree, you might disagree, but either one is okay. I'm just sharing, as requested, my own view, let's say, on what's going to come up. So before we look at what's coming, let's recap. Essentially a year ago, roughly, give or take, not quite, is it, but around that, we transitioned from, and let's take away all the astrological titles for it. Let's take it all away. I don't care about any of that. It's just words. Let's actually look at the quality of the transition. Ultimately, the transition was a switch from the magnetic to the electrical influence, really, with regards to time. So obviously, if you've trained with me, or you spent any time looking at my writings or whatever, or listen to my rambling waffles online, you'll know that to me, yin and yang, when experienced on the level of somatic manifestation, if you like, the experiential level, are largely magnetic and electrical. That's really what they are. That doesn't mean that yin and yang are this on their deepest possible levels, because of course they're not. The electrical and the magnetical experience are just what is how they manifest on that denser level, shall we say. But if we use these two as models, we can understand a little bit about how things are taking place within us and within the world. So we've spent a long time, many years, the entire of the lifetime of anybody listening to this, in what I would call the magnetic age, okay, in a very yin-chi organized era. So what this means, yin is organizing and form, essentially, that's what it's based on. So it's also a kind of dampener on the movement of electricity, on the movement of yang. So if you think about how this might work in your body in Neigong, it's not that hard to understand, is it? Because what we try to do is we build a lot of yang qi through our practice, which is an electrical energy that flows within the nervous system, and then energizes actually on a cellular level the various parts of our body, everything from the blood through to the tissues, through to the muscles. There's a whole complex way that we can understand this, and really this is a study of what Qigong does on that kind of deepest level. But if you think about that electrical energy that builds in your body, and it produces life, it produces activity, it produces growth, okay? And it moves in the nerves, which can be either stimulating, of course, like a light electrical current, or it can be overbearing in the case of just this massive conduction of energy through the body that can even be damaging if your circuitry is not set up for a large degree of electrical conductivity. It can be a little bit of a problem. Yeah, think about just whacking your finger in a plug socket and how that would be. It's not going to be the most amazing thing for you. But at the same time, we need that yang qi to live, okay? We need some of it. Now, yin qi is more like the magnetic kind of quality that moves in fields, organizing fields. Dantian shell, auric field, things like this. Anyway, there's more, but essentially that. But yin qi on the level of mind is even the structure and organization of the mind, because yang qi would be largely generated by and causative for thoughts, especially emotionally charged thoughts, whereas the structure of your belief system and your emotional intelligence and your ability to conceptually understand your mind would be yin qi, really, the organizing field of the thoughts. Yeah, so just like anything, they can come out of balance with one another. So if there's too much yin qi, it can be a real stagnator, kind of dampening on everything, and things will become a little bit too structured, and the mind become a little bit too structured too. Too much yang qi, things can become over-excitable, over-energized, difficult to organize, kind of chaos or anarchy can arise from that kind of energy. I use anarchy in the common sense, not the literal political definition, before some of you control me. I know we talk about anarchy in a way that's not really representative of its original political views, but you know what I mean, that kind of crazy expression of energy can be there if yang qi is out of control, right? So the two of them are supposed to work together, okay? They're supposed to work together. They are essentially, yin and yang qi on the deeper levels of the body would organize the cellular and molecular structures in the body, I suppose, and the yang qi would be the energy that is developed within those systems or move between them. So we want both to work in harmony with one another. So on deeper levels, of course, yin and yang can refer to components of spiritual connection and things like that, like far more obscure, but I'm literally talking on a kind of dense experiential level. Now what this means is that eras that are developed during a yin phase or a magnetic phase are very much kind of dependent on this. It means the control is a little bit more. Now I don't mean political, I'm not talking that. I mean generally with regards to the nature of energy. Things are a bit more structured, shall we say, something like this, a bit more orderly, a little bit more conservative, perhaps in their kind of energy. Whereas eras that are in an electrical age, which are moving into a year ago, are a little bit more dominated by kind of potential and energy and expression, and those kind of control systems, don't make it political, I'm talking about something else, start to break down and a lot more potential energy is released. The plus side of yin magnetic eras is that essentially things can be approached in a very ordered structural way, whereas the plus side of electrical eras, said that the right way around, magnetic, this is electrical eras, yang eras, is that they can transition into new phases. They are periods of change that can be exciting. Okay, but they each come with their problems, which you can probably already guess, maybe if you've been listening to what I've been saying up until now. So there's even a nature, I mean, really, I presume I'm talking mostly to spiritual practitioners or cultivators. So the nature of the magnetic era is for somebody that wants, say, awakening or enlightenment, to use the Western term, okay, it's a Western term, but something like this, who wants that to achieve moksha or union with Tao. A lot of this can be done by controlling or manipulating, I shouldn't use those words, should I? Mastering, shall we say, the magnetic energies as much as anything. So really the emphasis is on yin qi. So what is that about? I mean, we can see within many of the traditions, even if they didn't write about it thousands of years ago, there's been a leaning towards this idea of stillness all the time, isn't there? Everything's about stillness. Within spiritual arts, we aim for stillness, we aim for calm, we aim for these kind of ideas. And of course as well then certain qualities such as humility and reverence and worship, the love of the guru, these kind of things are very much things that would actually release that yin energy, because if you can touch upon the state of reverence and worship within that kind of yin energy, then what happens is it opens up and creates a potential for a great transformation within the kind of spiritual body, your connection to the divine, okay? But while that's still possible in this age we've moved into, the age is not supporting it. It's not really supporting that. So increasingly, we've seen over the years building up to this transition, because of course the transition's not like that. There's a build up to it and a movement away from it. And certainly in the years building up to it, which has been the last decade or so, there's almost been a kind of resurgence really of that fascination for the kind of other side of the training, the animated, the energy, the cathartic, the release kind of side of it, which is more yang energy, electrical energy kind of training. And it wasn't really approached very healthily in the majority of cases. It became kind of self-indulgent. But it also wasn't really going with the time of the era. But now as we move into the electrical phase, actually a different kind of energy is dominant. It means that the chances of opening up that massive space within the yin field within you through pure reverence to a higher power is a lot less likely. It doesn't make it useless by any sense of the imagination, because both yin and yang must be worked on. But really what we're looking at with regards to this era that we are in is the yin field is really governed and put into the right state. More to do with your connection to your own quality of yin. So it's more of an individuated area. So it means that really teachers, your relationship with a teacher, and I'm not talking a general teacher, but I mean if you really ever meet that one person in your life who you think, okay, or more than one I suppose, that's really going to guide me and this is something I want to follow, and some of you might meet that person, some of you might not. But essentially the relationship will be unhealthy or unhelpful if it's based upon that guru looking at them like they're a deity or a god on earth kind of relationship, where actually in the last era that could be helpful, although of course there was pitfalls and traps to that, because finding that person can be difficult and there's all kinds of stickiness and problems with that kind of relationship. But in this era, that's not even helpful particularly. It's more that the relationship should be based more upon sort of a familial kind of quality, as if you're related, brethren, brothers, or something like this, maybe father to son, father to daughter, mother to son, whatever, you know what I mean? You can put all the gender relevant words in, but you know what I mean? These kind of relationships are a lot more helpful, so that it's still based upon respect, but respect and love, certainly, but it's a little bit more grounded, you know, because the quality of moving into electrical era is, of course, what does yang qi, electrical energy, need? It needs grounding as much as possible. Whereas in the previous era, the grounding was already kind of there, but now the grounding is not there. Okay, that energy is kind of, it's all over the place. So we need everything to be a little bit more on a down-to-earth basis in order to grapple with or deal with that rising yang energy. During the electrical phase, the age of the mechanic is upon us. Things that I'd already kind of subconsciously moved towards in the way that I teach, but I think that it's going to become more prevalent, and I'm seeing it. I'm seeing that switch in some of the other teachers that I know and I respect with regards to their skill level. Some of them are resisting it, and I can see actually in the public eye there's a tendency towards them to start moving towards sort of guru status, and they're trying to kind of fight this change, you know, and I can see some of the teachers trying to switch their word in so they sound a bit more like they're kind of old yoga gurus speaking. We're actually the ones that are sensible, are moving in a more mechanical direction. So I don't just mean body mechanics, but you know what I mean, they're discussing the causation that leads to a particular process of awakening from their experience or from their tradition, and then guiding people in a more even level towards that place. So some people are kind of almost clinging to the old era, trying to fight it, mainly because they want to retain their power and their position, or create some power and position in an age where trust of hierarchies is kind of at an all-time low, I would say. But those who are learning how to work with these energies, I can see them shifting towards that way of teaching. And I have to say, for me personally, it suits me more. It suits me more. I have a personal preference, always have had, for that kind of teaching anyway. I've never wanted to be someone's father figure. I've never wanted to be someone's guru. I would much rather be their loved and respected friend that helped them through the arts. And of course there always has to be a slight practical hierarchy with regards to, if you're teaching someone, the assumption is you know more about that subject than them. That always has to be there a little bit if you're going to teach anyone, but there's a way of doing it, you know, and I think that guru relationship, it's not there, it shouldn't be there, it's not healthy, yeah. So this is a kind of an interesting transition with regards to teaching. I think as well, with regards to teaching, speaking to teachers, because I know so many of you do be aware that in the previous era, the last decade and a half, or well, longer than that, but you know, I mean, a lot of you have been teaching about that length, some of you. You could kind of get away with just teaching Qigong and discussing how it works and going through the mechanics, but in this era that's going to be a little bit difficult. It's going to be tricky, because what you're going to find is people are going to naturally have a lot more yang qi moving through their system. The environment has released it and is increasingly releasing it, and this isn't in some kind of age of Aquarium move towards the third eye opening. I'm not talking about that, but there's just more potential energy moving through people's circuitry on a wider scale, and people aren't going to be able to deal with that. So what that means is there's going to be an increase in problems that arise from arts like Qigong, yoga, meditation, or any of these kind of arts, anything internal, but people look inside. There's going to be more problems arising from this than you've ever seen before. It's going to be dragon sickness and issues and chi deviations, just because the systems are going to get burnt out. So be aware that as teachers, I think there's a wise transition to make, is that if your interest, like mine, really was in kind of going as deep as you possibly can spiritually, you might have to step back from that a little bit until you get to know people and kind of gauge them a little bit, and engage the students, and also gauge your own skill level as well, of course. But certainly when dealing with the people you're teaching, just kind of look, because a lot of people are going to come and they're going to need a lot of assistance with regards to their health. And I don't mean they've got asthma or they've got diabetes or something. I'm more referring to the fact that they're going to need to learn how to deal with this extra energy that's in the system. Something has to be done about it. So with regards to your knowledge of something like Qigong or meditation, yoga, whatever it is you teach, you're going to need, or I would advise you to really study, because you're going to need a deeper understanding of the mechanics behind what you are doing and how it actually works. Not just enough of the chi flows. You need to know more, because I think there's going to be more likely that people are going to have more burnt out systems, and people are already going to come to you burnt out. So you're going to see an increase, already have done over the last year, of mental illness and psychological breakdown, and people's really struggling. And that's not just to do with lockdown or politics. If the world was in as marvelous a place as it could be, you would still be seeing this, because the energy of the time is driving that yang qi into the system. And where is it going? Nervous system. And what is it going to fry? Kidneys. That's what's going to happen. Burnout on an emotional, psychological level is going to be greater in the coming year. Well, let's talk about this year. This year it's going to be a lot more. You are going to see people breaking down and having psychological breakdowns. There's going to be a breakdown of relationships. For many people, there's going to be a breakdown of life situations. There's going to be a breakdown of people's coping mechanisms. There's going to be a breakdown of jobs and careers. It's already started, you know, that's what's going to be taking place, because people are going to be on the edge of not being able to cope. They're going to come to the internal arts for assistance with this. So that really is the priority. And if you look at those of you in Lotus Negong who've been with me for a while, maybe you can see the difference in emphasis on some of the material I've been teaching, especially within the academy, because that's been the majority of my teaching this last year. But look at what I'm trying to do with people. See how there's a lot more attempt to deal with health issues, to do with kind of being fried and learning how to anchor that energy a lot more, because I know there's more yang qi in the system than there ever was, more electrical energy in that circuitry. And that's marvelous, because that can help people in their practice, because yang qi can be an amazing rocket fuel. But at the same time, people need to learn how to deal with it, and their system has to be able to cope with it. So a lot more instruction of things like anchoring the breath and building all the organ systems and opening the channels and preparing the body and creating that density on the body so that they can deal with this kind of energy. This really is what we should be moving towards as a tradition, because this transition we're going through is a 3-year transition, roughly, but it carries on. We are literally moving into the electrical age. That's where we're going. So you're not going to see a time where we transition out of that in your life. Anybody listening to this, we're going to be moving into this electrical age. It's the age when energetic practice, the study of mechanics of cause and effect, are going to be more important for people's practice than anything else. With regards to cultivation on a kind of mental level, it's going to be dealing with the nature of mind and understanding what it is. Okay, that's going to be quite major for people too, because people are going to struggle with their mind 100%. I think that I will increasingly over the year talk more about the kind of nature of training in this kind of age, because this is an oversimplification. There's a lot to it. There are whole aspects to do with mental training, spiritual training, physical training, energetic training that are very relevant to this. And don't think for a second that the divine is out of the question. It's definitely not. My personal connection over the last year to what I might call divinity has been certainly a lot greater than it's ever been in my entire life. But I have had to use the energy of the time in a very sensible manner. I've actually managed to make it support my practice in a greater way than I have before. And increasingly I'll be explaining this. And when I can teach people directly, which I really don't wish to do, during a phase when I'm worried about people getting sick. I don't believe that I'm some radical kind of freedom fighter if I pull people into a group and enable them to all catch respiratory conditions. I think that's a weird kind of demonstration of my my resolve or liberation as a human being, my rights towards freedom. So I don't wish to do that really. So I won't do that yet. But when I do bring people together, I think you'll like it, because I'll show you how to work with this in a very specific way, and I've adjusted my way of training to this era, and I'll be very happy to share it with you, certainly. So I'll be really interested to see how that goes. But for now, it's enough to just get on with what we're doing on our own and keep everybody safe at this time. So that's kind of the nature of the change of the training, and it's not that different from what I was saying with regards to the Great Conjunction and that transition a year ago. So if you want to, I would advise finding that video from a year ago, because it still applies now. Like, it still applies. That era we're going through, nothing I said in there is not applicable to the moment. With regards to life and, I don't know, world events and politics and people's views, obviously the last couple of years have been difficult, but I think it's safe to say that the last year, certainly in my experience, has been more tumultuous, I shouldn't have chose that word because I can't say it, have been more up and down. There's been more upheaval in the last 12 months than there has been on the years before. And you might think, well, actually it's been very same, because we've still had the COVID pandemic and we still had everything going on. But I don't mean that. I mean with regards to people. I think that emotionally, the level of conflict and difficulty and division has been a lot higher. I would say that even during periods of relative normality with regards to how our lives are structured when things opened up temporarily, we're still subject to a lot more turmoil and anger. I certainly saw a big uptake, a big increase in this kind of level of conflict. I guess at the start there was feelings of kind of fear and uncertainty, and then now we've moved into an era where people are really kind of staking the ground, drawing their line in the sand and putting their flag there, and this is where I stand, this is my belief system. And you might say that that's a natural evolution of the situation that we're in, and that's possible. But also it's a sign of what happens when you have increased electrical energy within the body, increased yang qi. So these kind of qualities we would expect to see anyway, no matter what was going on in the world. And that's likely to continue for another couple of years during the transition, and then start to peter out, providing that we don't develop too many problems during this era. So this is my biggest factor, and this part I talk about now is probably the most controversial part, the part that will upset some and others will like. I think it's really dividing, which is a part of the problem. But I have to talk about it because people are asking for my view, and I think it's relevant to what's coming in the year. And of course, this is what is happening in the world with regards to things like COVID and vaccine passports and vaccine mandates and things like this, you know. And I think we can see that many people, some people are trying to duck and cover and sort of stay bunkered down, aren't they, during this time, but other people are taking very strong stances on the current situation. And we can see the divide, can't we? I mean, there's definitely been a massive increase in protests and marches and all these kind of problems around the world, and you only have to go on social media to see people's views. And I'm increasingly hearing about families that are being torn apart by different opinions. I was even speaking to somebody this morning about it, and then somebody yesterday about it, different person actually, about how their family life is being affected by people with different views in the family, and it's very strong views, creating a conflict. It's becoming problematic. And we're seeing this on all levels, all the way from politics, all the way through our media, through to people in general. So for me, it's been difficult because it hasn't been difficult actually. It's not true. If I think about it objectively, it hasn't been difficult for me to deal with this. It's kind of like I use the word like I feel like I should. Here's a bit of self-analysis for you on video. What I was going to say is it's been difficult dealing with the deluge of different people's views, because I've had, as some of you might know, quite a lot of annoyance directed towards me because I won't take a stance either way on what's going on in the world. But actually it hasn't been difficult at all. I don't mind that people get annoyed. It doesn't bother me actually. But it's still been going on. It's still been happening. So this is the point, is I've even tried explaining this to a couple of people that I wanted to explain it to, my view. And really they kind of epitomized one of the qualities of this age was they literally could not hear my view because it didn't fit into their categories of what were my options. So if I had to summarize the characteristics mentally and opinion-wise and politically and viewpoint-wise of this era, I guess, it's that people are operating very much in a multiple choice kind of way. So they ask you a question and then they expect you to answer either A, B, or if you're lucky, C, but normally just A or B. And if you don't fit into one of those two answers, they literally cannot hear you. It's like it's impossible for them to hear you. And I was very confused by it at first because they would ask a question with A and B as an option, and I would say, well, actually, I'm C. There's a third option, and they would almost like blank your answer, just ignore it, like it didn't compute. It just went through, like that doesn't make, it didn't fit their programming. And then sometimes after a while they would get annoyed and say, you're avoiding my question. I'm not avoiding your question, I'm giving you the answer that is relevant to your question. It's just not one of the preset things. And this is one of the downsides of the electrical era, is that actually in some cases your ability to constructively think can be restricted. Okay, can be restricted. And I'll explain why in a minute. But essentially this viewpoint has been, if people have been asking, are you on the side of vaccines or are you on the side of anti-vaccine? And of course on the side of vaccine, I suppose means you support, or as far as the other side would be concerned, vaccine passports as well. And then often from their view, kind of where those might go, the slippery slope towards, well, I've heard everything from digitized money, which some countries it's already there pretty much from what I've seen from traveling, through to the social credit system of China or something that people think is coming in the West. And I'm not saying they're right or wrong. I'm saying I don't care really. So there's that side, and then there's the other side which is very much about this side obviously is about we need to keep everybody safe by didn't explain that. This side is very much about let's keep everybody safe by taking these vaccines because that will solve the problem and whatever we need to do to keep everybody safe. And the other side is saying, no, this is a deliberate attempt to take over. This is a power grab and a money grab and domination, and even some very extreme views, in my opinion, like we're moving towards an era similar to the Second World War with Nazi Germany or something. And we're seeing this kind of division. I'm sure you know all this. You don't need me to tell you anything about this, because if you've got the internet, which we all do, then, it's right there with you all the time, isn't it? I think you'll have already seen all these kind of arguments, of course, and you might have heard variations on a theme, but I'm sure you already know what it is. I mean, it's quite funny, even the people in my life that I knew that wouldn't normally have had any knowledge of what we might call conspiracy theories or the alternative way of looking at life, and now all of a sudden thrust into the world where they have to take a look at all these views because they're so prevalent. They've been discussed in mainstream media sometimes as well, usually in an attempt to rubbish them, of course. But you know that, so that's what's going on, right? And consequently, people are moving into these two categories, and that is what I mean multiple choice question A, multiple choice question B, whereas I'm in multiple choice option C, which people cannot hear. And what they cannot hear is that I believe, my view is that the biggest problem is not whether, these are the biggest problems we are facing that are epitomized in this era. The biggest problem is not to lose our control to some kind of governance system where everything you carry and you scan your money and there's a barcode on your neck and a microchip in your arm or whatever. To me, that's not the biggest problem. That really isn't. I think if that is true and we are moving in that way, then I almost think that's an inevitability of society. I don't necessarily think it's something I like, but I think it's the way. I think that if that's the way things are going to go, things would have unfolded whether we had COVID or not anyway. That's that, like whatever. I also don't think the other problem would be COVID. I don't think that's a big issue as well. I know it's very sad for people who've lost family members and loved ones. I've lost some friends to it as well. And they didn't all have, the ones people I knew, you couldn't really discard them as having comorbidities and being unhealthy either. It was different from that. So the amount of people that have said there's no COVID, it's just standard flu, and they're lying about the numbers and things. Well, I don't think that's true, because I've never known so many people hospitalized with pneumonia and respiratory disorders over the last year and a half as I have in my entire life. So that's false. There is a respiratory disease that's going around that's affecting people, which is what caused me to make the decision to ask people not to teach during this winter in cold countries, definitely, or in places when COVID is exploding, like the UK or here or whatever. I don't think it's wise, and I asked people not to do that. And that wasn't because of any government legislation, that wasn't because of any adherence to rules like I'm a sheeple, I think I've been called many times, or something like that. It's simply because I would rather wait until it was safer, the weather was warmer, the environment was better, in a time when we know that respiratory disorders spread in the winter, and I really don't want to gather people at that time and put people at risk, because whether I know that it's all a conspiracy or I know that it's all real and we need to do this is irrelevant. I don't know either of those things. The only thing I do know for sure is there is a respiratory disease that's making people sick, and that's what I'm operating on. That's the only thing I can do. But I still don't think that COVID is a huge problem for us either. I think it's a blip and it will pass. As I said, it's very sad that some people will die and suffer, but it will pass. It will pass, okay? If we are moving towards a stage where we have to carry ID and scan ourselves in and out of whatever, like, again, it will pass. It's a blip. And what I mean by pass, it may come, it may go, it may come, it may stay, whatever. People will adjust and they will live in that way. That's that. So whatever, life progresses in that way, and that's that. And if it's COVID and people are getting sick, eventually the disease will burn out and pass, and that will go too. But what will stay is the level of division that exists between people. And that to me is option C, because what I see as the biggest problem, which is really exacerbated by this electrical age, is that people are unable to listen to the opinions of others, or even to separate them from those opinions. So those divisions grow wider and wider to a point where they are identified to a massive extent with a view or a position that essentially creates a side, and that is going to create division and separation. Now, the reason that's a bigger problem is because if you have a society, which you need to have a group of people, or a community, doesn't matter what level it is, there has to be either a shared view that everybody falls under, a shared cultural identity or a shared cultural belief or something that aligns you in a different direction. Because if you had 10 people, they might have different views, but then if they have a shared ethos, they're a community, or a shared interest, they're a community. But if you have 10 people all pulling in completely different directions, you don't have a community, you don't have a society. You don't. What you have is a potential for complete conflict. So as a society, what we have is shared views, like, none of us like murder or abuse or assault unless there's something wrong with us. We tend to agree that there are things that are good and bad within our society, ways we act and ways we don't act. But of course, those ideas are all breaking down. Okay, everything is being conceptually discussed, and there's nothing wrong with that. If you want to break down the parameters of what we view as a social construct, there's nothing wrong with that, and I think that's inevitable. And we can see that now with discussion on sexuality and gender and race and all of these kind of ideas. And I'm not against the breaking down of that and saying there's multiple genders and race is subjective, all these kind of things. Like, that's all great, like, for people to explore it. But it's not going to work if society or a community or a group cannot then listen to the other person's views and not have some kind of contempt towards them. And also it becomes dangerous if people don't have the fluidity to change their views. And that is what is happening. And that, to me, is the biggest problem of this age. Because long after COVID is gone, long after whatever societal changes with regards to monitoring or whatever have come in and normalized, that division will still remain. That division will still remain because it's a quality. And that division will turn into something else. So what started as vax versus anti-vax will turn into another kind of division till eventually you have a polarized society. And that will create two things. One, conflict. That's what it will create. And secondly, what it will create is a very easy manipulation of groups. So this might sound like a conspiratorial, but I'm not. I just believe it's a normal part of human life. That if you have a group of people that are divided 50-50, they're easier to control or make decisions about than if you have a group that are 100% zero. Now, the reason for that is because if you have a group that's 50-50 or 49-51, maybe you've seen some world votes that are a bit like this, you only have to switch the view by 1 or 2%, switch the vote to take control. Okay, so if it's 50-50, I only need a 1% tip. Now I've won the election, I've won the vote, I can choose what people do. It's so easy to manipulate people. This means that ultimately society can move in a direction that is under control by whoever has the reins at that time. And as we've seen politically, it's not always the best people that are in charge. So I think that is a bigger problem. It could steer us towards kind of political extremism or something. Whereas people are allowed to make their views as a community, and the votes or the groups are switched more 70-30, 60-40, it's a little bit more difficult for someone to manipulate it. You know, you can't tip it by 1 or 2% or degrees. It's very difficult. So I don't actually care about that much, other than if you understand that, you might be able to see why the media and why various sources that have financial motivations, I suppose is the word, behind all this, or political motivations, might want to keep people at their throat. It's easier to control people like that, to keep that vote very level. And there's been a lot of votes we've seen 51-49, and so on and so on. So what it means is that people's views are being deliberately pushed into one of these two poles by the media, stirring people up. So I think there's actually more of a deliberate attempt to give people access to both sides in an even way. And I think that a lot of people are conned right now because they think they're either privy to this information that's trying to be suppressed, or they're privy to the mainstream view, but actually or not, I don't think either view is being suppressed. I think that's a trick. And I think that if you want some material to appear to be suppressed, you just suppress it on one source, mainstream media, and then if you do a very small percentage, you suppress it on underground media. And weirdly, that almost empowers people to be more likely to believe it. So it becomes another form of control anyway. So all the people that think they're being suppressed because what they're saying is dangerous, I think you're wrong. I think you're incorrect, because I can find that information on the internet anytime I want, so it's not really being suppressed. Not really. It's being suppressed just enough to confirm to you that you are on the right track. Now, by hearing what I'm saying, you might think that I'm taking a political view or a political stance. But I'm not actually. I'm not, because I still sit in that position where I have my opinion, but I don't know what is happening in the world, and that's okay. But I'm highlighting it to you because so many of you seem to know. You seem to think you know. Now, the problem with knowing something is that you don't have room for switching. You don't have room for maneuvering. So you are being pulled into these different poles. And if people just sat and actually listened and took attention and awareness to how they felt and what was going on, they would see that actually they're not so knowledgeable. They don't know. And maybe that they, whichever camp they're in, have both been controlled or duped a lot more than they think they have. And why is that? It's because of the increased yang qi. That's what it is. It's not even because of some nefarious group or anything. It's just the increased yang qi. Because you have more electrical energy moving in your system than you've ever had before. Some of you might feel it, some of you might not. Some of you might feel tired, but it's irrelevant. Because where will it go? It will go into the kidneys, and it will go into the adrenals, and it will go into your emotional state that connects you with fight or flight. So it's naturally going to have a tendency to put you either into a state of fear or a state of conflict. So you are naturally going to have a tendency towards those states right now, fear and conflict. That's how you're going to be thinking. Now that means normal people are going to be feeling that way, but also so are people in charge. Don't think that the people running the countries and running the world aren't also subject to this yang qi, because they are. So they're also in greater degrees of fear or conflict. That's where they are. So if everybody in the world is in this state, what is going to happen? Well, the first thing that happens if you're in fight or flight is your ability to constructively or critically think goes down, because you go into a more reactive state. Now that just might sound like some fuzzy kind of new age speak or something, but no, it's more major than you think. Reactive thought, that is the quality of yang qi moving through your system, reactive thought. What is the negative side of yin qi moving through your system? Actually, you're more prone to just follow, like controlled thought. So it's much easier just to accept and blindly go along. The age of the guru, the age of the cult, the age of the follower, the age of the, worship of a person or something. But now we're in the age of reactive thought instead. That doesn't mean people couldn't reactively think before, of course they did, but it's more to the surface right now. Now, when you think reactively, you get two things happen. Things will either confirm your view or they will rub up against your view. Now, when you're reactive, what happens when something rubs up against your view is it confirms it. So you literally have no other option other than confirming your view. So as an example, I am in reactive thought right now, and I believe the sky to be blue. Somebody tells me the sky is blue, and I go, yes, the sky is blue. That's very important to me. Somebody comes along and tells me the sky is actually red. The reactivity in me goes, fuck you, the sky is blue. And that view reinforces my view rather than listening to why this person said that in the first place. So person in a reactive view can literally not change their viewpoint. They can't do it. They're caught in that pole. So if you are in that state, there is no possibility of you knowing the truth. A reactive mind cannot know the truth for the simple reason that fear and anger are not truth-based. Fear and anger are survival-based. They will cause you to try to defeat the things that you perceive to be a problem. Now, of course, on one side, the problem is going to be the system that's coming in place and taking away my liberties, or it's going to be the experimental medicine that might kill me, or it's going to be the other people who see me as an enemy are treating me like a Jew in World War II or something, I think is what they're saying. Whereas on this side, the enemy is those people are unvaccinated and they're dangerous. The enemy is those people are prolonging this pandemic by not getting vaccinated, or those people believe wild, crazy views that the government's trying to kill me. Okay, so in those two viewpoints, neither of those come from a place of truth. So what I tried to explain was they come from fear. They come from fear and they come from anger. Now people have even, 2 years ago, if I'd have said to a group of people, okay, a lot of your views are coming from fear and let's explore it, most people would have gone, all right, well, let's consider that and think about it. Yeah, okay, I don't want to be in that state. I don't want to be scared or angry. I don't think that's healthy for my thought processes. Now, if I say that to a group, which admittedly I've had to do virtually, I've got people in denial going, that's not true. And I've got other people saying, yes, but my fear and my anger is justified because it is righteous and I am defending the good. I've never had that reaction before. That is new. For people to actually be now defending their fear and anger, that is a sign that they are in fight or flight because there is more electrical energy moving through their system. No situation can be understood to a better level through fear and anger. Now, the reason I'm talking about that is because this is going to be 125% the pervading quality of this year. Okay. Now, funnily enough, as an aside, if you look at kind of the, if you do look at the kind of horoscopes, I suppose, the animals, like the monkey, for example, which I am, the animals that are going to struggle with 2022, according to the kind of, even on a simplistic level, the horoscopes, are going to be animals like the monkey. Why? Well, because the monkey, or the rabbit even as well, actually, because animal signs like mine tend to thrive on the ability to move within a group and be very diplomatic and even sort of convince people, I suppose, I know that's negative, and sway them to their view. They have the ability to, they make very good politicians in a way, if you had a good politician, who could sort of sway people around and talk people around, but they're going to struggle in 2022, and why is that? Because the energy is not going to support that. 2022 is not going to be a year when anybody can change their mind on anything. It's just going to reinforce their view. More anger, more fear between people on a societal level. So some people can't see that this, to me, is the biggest problem. This is a bigger problem than the vaccines or the virus, because this problem this level of division can last a lot longer than either of those problems. It really can. It can last a lot longer, and it can be very destructive for relationships or cooperation or societies or communities or organizations or whatever. It can be very problematic. It also means that on an individual level, it can be more difficult for people to know the truth of something. And as a spiritual teacher, that's very, very important. So if you want to know what's likely to happen in the world, if you want that kind of prediction, just take what I've said there and then extrapolate that out on bigger levels. What's going to happen societally, what's going to happen financially, what's going to happen blah, blah, blah. That's what you're going to see. That is going to be a bigger influence. Those kind of qualities are going to be a bigger influence on the world and what happens than anything else, If you're looking at governments and you see that maybe they are being a bit more oppressive or whatever than normal, if that's how you see it, then do remember they're also operating from fear and anger too. They're no different from yourself. They're still human beings that are in that state. Whatever their goals in life might be, they are still operating from fear and anger. And if you're moving towards an age when you've got division of groups into extreme poles that can't listen to one another, and then you also have an age when there's a breakdown of that yin field, those things that are structured, okay, societal formalities, societal norms, I suppose, even like I say, the example of gender, sexuality, race, and identity that's being broken down. If those kind of things are being broken down, that also creates a fear for the people that have control of that system, of course, doesn't it? That's because they're seeing a kind of shift away from that which they gave them some kind of security. So there's going to be a reactivity there as well. Now, I think ultimately this reactivity is going to be there for a little while, and then it's going to ease back. It's going to ease away. As we start to move away from the transition towards a time of being more settled, everybody will be a little bit more at ease and kind of settle and go, all right, let's take a breather here. And hopefully there won't have been too much carnage caused over this sort of period of change. But what can remain is the damage that people have done to their minds. Because if you sit there and you enable yourself to move into these two poles, and you become a very rigid person that functions on fear, anger, reactivity, and always trying to form sides, it's going to be quite difficult to get out of that pattern, you know? Like, think in the long run. Don't think right now. Just think in the long run, you know? Whatever view you have, you don't have to be that reactive, angry person. So the advice that I would have how to deal with this really is, as much as anything, to deal with yourself. Some of you might think this is a cop-out for me to say this, but what will happen will happen. There's one of the greatest arrogances that human beings have is, I think we seem to be under the illusion that we're more in control than we think we are. We're not. What will happen will happen. Things will unfold as they are supposed to unfold. Sometimes those things will be difficult, sometimes they will not. But what we have the ability to do is watch ourselves and see how we interact with people and how we interact with the world and how we interact with ourselves. Those who are certain, those who know, are the ones that are furthest from truth. I'm sure that's one of the rules of Taoism and one that's been passed on for hundreds of years. So if you know what is happening, if you know what the agenda is, if you know what the risk is during this time, trust me, you know less than the others. You are moving away from understanding that there is a causative system that isn't based upon reactivity, and that's where you are. You are stuck there. You are lost. Apply awareness to what you're doing. Look at your interactions and try to understand how to manage this extra energy that's in your system. I don't want you to suffer with the anger. I don't want you to suffer with a psychological illness. I want you to get your mind out of the way. And what I'll do, if you want me to, is in a few weeks' time, I'll give you a bit of time to process this and get through here, is I'll do a follow-up video to this, maybe explaining how to use this extra yang energy in an effective way. But first of all, we have to get this reactivity, fight or flight state out of the way. So what I would ask is anybody who trusts me would be to, you don't have to, if anyone does, to listen to what I'm saying here and then try to apply that to yourself and see if you can move away from that state, okay? And if you can, even if you feel a bit lost, because that's what can happen, isn't it? You move away from your strong anger or fear-based identity, all of a sudden you feel a bit lost. Identityless can feel a bit sort of disorientating, I suppose is the word. And sometimes it can be problematic, because if you've had a very strong identity with your cohorts, I stand for this. Everybody needs to do the thing to keep us all safe. And then all of a sudden you have a bit more fluidity within that. Oh, hang on a minute, I'm not so sure about this. Then actually within your particular peer group, it can be difficult. All I'm asking for people to do is to understand that the polarization is not helpful. It's not helpful. The world is not as bad as people think. This is something that I really want to make sure everybody at least thinks about. Like, we always hear from the media and we hear from other people that the world is just this awful place. And okay, we've got pollution in the sea and there might be problems with the environment and you know, whatever. And there's always something going on, you know, but there's a rule of balance. There are hugely positive things in the world as well. So I'm not saying to ignore the things that are difficult or challenging. But if you don't understand that the world is also a place of great beauty, you're not in a state of balance. And of course, however you view the world, you'll start to view yourself as well. I don't know if you know this, but you and the world are integrated into one whole. So if you see the world as a doom-filled place, you'll see yourself as a doom-filled place. I didn't word that very well. You'll see yourself as a doom-filled environment. So that will be negative as well. And that will start to impact upon not only your health, but also your actions and your mentality. You'll develop guilt around everything. You'll start to view yourself as being responsible for all of the perceived negativities and start to take on things that aren't really true. Because if you're going to adopt all of the negative sensations, then you also have to adopt all of the positive things, the loving things that are going on in the world every single day as well. I mean, does your subjective reality match what you're being told from the outside? And you might say, well, no, because I'm in this little bubble, and what about the rest of the world and stuff as well? I've traveled the rest of the world, probably more than most people listening to this. I've been to a lot of it. I haven't been to South America, actually, and I've only done a little bit in Africa, but I've been to a lot of the planet. I've been around different communities of different wealths, and I've been to some of the poorest nations and poorest places. I've been in the slums in India and seen real kind of difficulty of life, and there's still joy, there's still love there, there's still connection between families. In some ways, there's actually more love in those kind of places than I often see in these kind of Western built-up kind of civilizations where people are locked in this kind of doom and gloom kind of view. It is very strange. My subjective personal experience of the world doesn't match the view that I'm being given by media and then by other people that are believing media. It's like there's some facts people don't know. I mean, do people know that every single day, statistics vary, between 120,000 and 170,000 people are lifted out of absolute poverty every single day on this earth? That's an amazing fact, and I've heard that fact from 3 different places now. 3 different places, and I heard it. And you know, like life provides you with those things, and I heard it on a TV program, then I heard it on a podcast, and I read it in a book actually, and I had to go look it up and saw that actually it was true. It's a supported statistic, and of course there's always statistics that work against that, but I mean, I'm sure even that alone is quite amazing as much as anything. And some of the environmental facts for areas of the environment that are improving are quite amazing too, and we don't hear about those, we just hear about the bad things. Now, I'm not saying that the negative things aren't there, but it's not the only story for what's happening in the planet, okay? Children aren't dying so much when they're born. There's not so many people starving on the planet. People have actually more free time than they had in the past to do things and pursue other things. And yeah, life is difficult, but it's also incredibly beautiful, and we're very blessed to be living at this age. And I think that on top of moving out of that reactivity, people need to recognize that as well. This whole view of we live in the most difficult era, not so sure about that. What about living at that time when the next village could rampage in on horseback and rape your wife and cut your head off, and it was only last month that 3 of your newborn children died of the plague or something? I think those eras were quite difficult as well. And it might seem strange to some of you to compare the two, but come on, like, it's not that bad for the majority of people on the planet right now, statistically for the majority of people. So does that mean we need to care for the minority? Of course we do. And things need improving all of the time. We can always move towards a better place. But at the same time, it's not helpful to view the whole world as this massively doom and dread-filled place. I talk to some people and they're so dour, so miserable. And these are spiritual practitioners. Spiritual practitioners, right, here's my final thoughts for 2022. If you are a Buddhist or a Taoist or a Hindu or a whatever, I don't know, Kabbalah follower, I don't know what you're doing, but whatever spiritual practice you have, if the more you practice, the more doom and gloom filled you become, the more negative you become, the more upset and angry and polarized, and I must take a strong political stance on this and this. Let me tell you something. Your arts are not working for you. They're not working for you. They're not. Because universally, all practitioners, and anyone who's gone deep enough into meditation will know this, that ultimately when you slip out of the stream of identity into the stream of connection that exists beneath it, something closer to the true nature of reality, you are filled with a sense of love. And when you connect with the world, yes, there is an undercurrent of suffering that pervades most things like a kind of fog or a mist. But behind that, through that, on top of that, is a great feeling of love, connection, and light that really suffuses into every part of reality. So when I see spiritual adepts becoming more adamant, we've got to fight the good fight, and this is the fucking end times, and we're all like all this rage, it's not working. You have to ask, what are you connecting with? Are you just going deeper and deeper into a kind of intelligence-based analysis of the world that you see on the outside? Because if you are, which I think a lot of people are accidentally slipping into, you're going to see doom or gloom, because you're developing a deeper analysis of something that is also distorted by the media influence that are telling you what an awful world we live in. Where actually, if you step back out of the societal, out of the political, out of the mental, out of the sensory experience, into a true stream of what reality is, you're free from those kind of influences, and you will find that actually a great positivity and a great feeling of connection arises. None of the spiritual teachers of the past told you to become more embroiled with the society, more embroiled with politics, more embroiled with life, did they? Don't think so. I think what they told you about or talked about was understanding how to work with the fabrications and the layers of mind, to step out of that into a stream of something that was more pure and more connected. So that's not just my view, right? I think that's something that's been shared, and I'm always talking to spiritual practitioners. This is what my talks are aimed at, because that's what I'm interested in. Specifically, that's the world I'm in. That is what I'm concerned with. I'm not concerned about your political rights. I'm concerned about your soul. I'm concerned about your spirit. I am concerned about those. I'm concerned about the fact that people derive a great dissatisfaction and unhappiness from an inability to connect with and perceive this layer of themselves. And that's what I'm concerned with. And because I'm concerned with that, that's why I'm more worried about the polarization into perceived truths, because those will anchor you into the level where you cannot actually experience the nature of reality for what it really is. If there is an us and them, there is no truth. And 2022 is going to have a tendency towards you moving into one of those two states: connection to the truth through increased electrical energy of yang, or polarization into those two groups. My advice is don't allow the world to push you into one of those reactive groups. Hopefully that helps. Maybe a little bit more vague than some of my other yearly predictions, but I think that this transition from magnetic to electric is far more important than what happens in the tiger year with regards to when it's good to do business and when it's good to get married and blah, 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 blah. We'll pick that up in a few years' time. Let's get through this phase first as a cohesive community full of love, and then we'll worry about the other things after.